All right. Welcome to Mighty Men Talks. This is Dr. Douglas Showles, and today we're going to just be diving into the subject of pornography and how it affects men and how it impedes men in growing in Christ. One of the things that I want to do is just, again, not beat around the bush. Nah, that's stupid. That's bad. That was bad. All right, it's Dr. Douglas Showles with Mighty Men Talks here today. I'm actually kind of in my formal dining area. Decided to get out of the studio. I say studio, that sounds real cool, doesn't it? Actually, just my office where I have to look at a wall. But now I have a picture window and I can actually watch people walk by this COVID-19 pandemic. It's got me a little stir crazy. And I'm watching people exercise. Personally, I feel healthier just getting to watch people exercise. But as I'm doing this, it again is making me consider and think about the pandemic of pornography. And so today, that's going to be the topic that we're going to begin to unfold. We're going to be walking through that over a series of episodes that will be taking each step and looking at it in its relation to each other. And so today we're going to look at, again, the idea of the impact of pornography across the church. Certainly we know it impacts culturally. We're not going to deny that. We're certainly aware of that. I believe we can look at our culture and see even the shift in what we would say as far as the sexual identity, the veracity of same-sex issues, and again, gender issues. All of those, I believe, are a result of the culture or the prominence of pornography, particularly in relation to the ability to access pornography in a continual basis. But again, my focus and desire for us is to consider the impact of pornography within the church. Why? Because first off, let's just be honest. Biblically, truthfully, we know what we're supposed to be different. And so if we're supposed to be different, then we should not have this issue within our confines of what we call the evangelical church. But that's not the case. In fact, studies have shown that there's not a whole lot of difference between those who identify as Christians and those who have no identity whatsoever in that form in their pornography usage. So we know that pornography is affecting the church, and so we want to take a look at that today. And so we're going to look at the impact of pornography. But to do so, we need to set the standard. We need to understand that we've got some definitions that we need to put out, and we need to make sure that we're all on the same page. One of the things that I believe is important, most important, is to understand what is biblical sex. One of our issues and one of the reasons I believe that we have pornography being so prevalent and it's allowed to continue is we don't talk positive and we don't certainly think in positive terms toward biblical sex. Remember, sex is a gift from God to a couple, and yet because of the perversion of it, we are now hesitant to talk about it at all. But biblical sex is good, and biblical sex is beautiful, and biblical sex is a gift from God. As a pastor, I have preached sometimes what we might say are controversial topics, as I am an expository preacher and I have walked through sections of Scripture without skipping over. And I walked through 1 Corinthians. And 1 Corinthians, needless to say, is filled with lots of challenging issues. In that, when I spoke about sexual immorality, and we preached on that issue and the issue of sexual immorality, I really had no conflict or no problem. What was interesting was that when I actually came and began in chapter 7 to preach about the good of sex, the gift of sex and how we are to utilize that idea of the God-given gift of sex to maintain the purity of a marriage, I literally had people get up and walk out because I was speaking positive of sex. And I received a lot of, thoughts and opinions that I was wrong in speaking positive of sex. So again, I think one of our challenges within church is to reframe, and I hate to say reframe, but we must reframe the topic. And what that means is to put it back in its biblical confines. We have allowed the perversion of sex to actually dictate the conversation of sex and overwhelm it to the point that we cannot speak positively of it. But what is biblical sex? So when we talk about that, when we utilize that across the times that we're going to be together, I want us to be certain we understand that what we're talking about is sex between a man and a woman within the confines of a biblical marriage. A biblical marriage being, again, between a man and a woman, united in a monogamous commitment under God, building intimacy through sexual expression for the purpose of a lifelong relationship. So let me repeat that, okay? Biblical sex, the definition that I utilize and I mean when I use that term, is sex between a man and a woman within the confines of a biblical marriage, united in a monogamous commitment under God, building intimacy through sexual expression for the purpose of a lifelong relationship. So, again, sex is good. Sadly, sex has been perverted. And the perversion of sex is explicit and prominent in every form through pornography. And so what we're talking about there is sexual deviance. We are overrun with sexual deviance. Anything that is outside of the biblical sex or biblical marriage is sexual deviance. And so we even need to understand what that is. So when I use the term sexual deviance, I'm meaning anything that is not the idea of biblical sex. So it's any sexual activity. Sexual deviance is any sexual activity, any practice, or deviation from sex within the confines of a biblical marriage. So it can be, again, viewing pornography. It can be acting out sexual expressions outside of biblical marriage. It can be the thought patterns that we develop. Again, these are sexual deviancies. So any of these ideas, again, so when we talk about sexual deviancy or sexual immorality, we're talking about anything that is not within the confines of sexual, biblical sex. So within the confines of a biblical marriage. So those are the two definitions that, again, I utilize, and that when I use those terms, they are what I'm describing. Okay, biblical sex, sexual deviancy. But then here's a question for us to consider. What is pornography? We know of the famous court case, and again, when they were trying to deal with the issue of pornography and this things that were taking place in their day, and the judge explained that he would know it when he would see it. Again, it's hard to describe. Well, it's really not that hard to describe. I do believe that, again, it's broad and it's narrow all at the same time. And actually, I want to use Tim Clinton and Ron Hawkins. They have a definition that they use, which I believe actually is probably one of the best, because it simplifies it. And so allow me to share that with you, the pornography definition. Pornography is sexual explicit material that dehumanizes, objectifies, and degrades men and women for the purpose of sexual arousal. So when we're talking about pornography, we're just talking about any and every form that it can possibly come in, that the ultimate end is to create sexual arousal. And that sexual arousal, again, is going to dehumanize, objectify, and degrade a man or a woman in that form. Because, again, it makes them simply a means of a personal, internal, and external sexual arousal. So what it is, it means we're using someone. We're abusing someone, whether physically or, again, from distance over the mediums that we have. Either way, again, what it means is that we are no longer treating that person with the God-given honor that they should have as one who bears the image of God. And so, therefore, we understand that's what pornography does. It raises every aspect of a person to being nothing more than a means for sexual arousal. So let's talk about another definition, because, again, this is important. Because actually, when I speak of pornography, and I will use that term continuously, whether I say it or not, what I do mean is, for the most part, when we're talking about the issue, is for it to be about cyber porn, because cyber porn, that medium, is different. It brings about something more than what other standards or previous practices of pornography were. When we're talking about stagnant images, pictures and so forth, no doubt they're not good. No doubt they're wrong. Again, they have their damaging effect. But again, we're talking about a veracity, an ability to now literally begin to create an addiction. And that's what cyber porn does differently. And because, again, it's born out of our medium that we have available to us through the internet, what we would have used to have in movies, where you would have to go to a movie theater or some other form to watch. We, over time, were able to see. Then it began to be able to be done through the home, because you could go to a video rental store and be able to rent that and bring that home and watch it. But then it began to be available over the internet, and as it was able to do that, then now you could do that in home through the computer, and you didn't even have to get out. And so then over that, the expansion of cyber porn into now what we have with our smartphones and the ability to literally everybody access it at any moment. So now what we did, even porn has adapted and changed its form to where, again, they do short clips. Their purpose, again, is to get you hooked. Quick, easy clips. Again, not movies and so forth as the previous practices were. So when we talk about cyber porn, so what are we talking about? Cyber porn is pornography accessed through the internet, allowing an immediate and unlimited source of images, videos, digital content depicting every form of sexual deviancy. So, cyber porn definition that I will be utilizing. So when I say cyber porn or pornography, this is what I mean. It's a pornography that is accessed through the internet, allowing an immediate and unlimited source of images, videos, or digital content that depicts every form of sexual deviance. Man, and so what cyber porn does, what cyber porn is the proverbial hook. It is much like the bait that you would throw out for in a water to try to catch a fish. The bait looks good. What you don't realize is there's a hook, and that hook has a barb. And so when that hook penetrates, then that barb keeps you from throwing the hook. And before long, you no longer get to dictate where you go and what you do. The one who has control of the hook now controls where you go and what you do. That's what we're talking about with cyber porn. So, cyber porn has a hook. And what do I mean by that? Well, cyber porn has a hook that actually begins to connect deep into a person's heart, mind, and soul. It begins to cause emotional, psychological, physiological issues within a person. This bears out with studies that these are actual events that begin to take place. Now again, not immediately, but as each person goes back, then before long, your emotions, your psychological well-being, your physiological workings of your mind actually then are going to be dictated and controlled and manipulated by the continual use of cyberporn. But see, we forget, even in that, most studies, when you look at the studies, they are lacking something because they forget the idea of the spiritual. So I don't want to forget the spiritual by any means. In fact, I think it's crucial because what it does is it dives into the spiritual, which then is the true hook that then begins to connect with our emotional, our psychological, and our physiological. And so with that, then cyberporn has a hook by going after our sin nature. That's what it does. Remember, if sexual arousal is outside of biblical marriage, then it is sexual deviance. And so therefore, it's using our sin nature, which finds sin alluring and therefore enticing, that once we begin to partake of it, that then we want more. And because again, the consequences are not immediate, we believe we can keep it contained or we can control it. And ultimately, the truth of that is that's not going to take place. So let me talk about cyberporn's hook. Cyberporn exploits the sin nature within a person to generate an addiction. The battle is within and not without. Now, that's going to be an important thing to understand as we move forward. The battle is within and not without. Guys, the reason cyberporn is so addictive, the reason that it has that hook, is it exploits our sin nature. And in doing so, it goes deep. And it has roots that run everywhere into every aspect of who we are. And then even as we might begin to identify ourselves and understand ourselves. And so it can run so deep. And that what happens in that is that what we have to realize is it's not good enough just to turn off the cyberporn. Because once it's taken root, guess what? It's there. And every guy out there that's ever seen an image or partaken of cyberporn, because I know I'm talking to guys that have this issue, okay? I've had this issue. So what we know is that we don't need the actual image anymore on the screen. Why? Because it's embedded in our minds. It's there. And so we actually have to do the fight to overcome pornography and overcome pornography addiction. We have to do it on the inside. Now, we have to start on the outside. But if we just do that, it's not enough. And this is where we see guys fail. This is where we know things mess up. And guys cannot break the cycle, the binge purge cycle. So, that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at the reality that there is a good sex, a biblical sex. We're going to be looking at the reality that we know there's a sexual deviance that, again, we can't even begin to cover all the ways that is formed. We know that pornography, again, is used to undermine and undercut the image of God in a person. We realize that cyberporn is utilizing the means of the internet, the smartphone, the continual access. and it depicts every form of sexual deviancy, which again builds the ability to create the addiction, because where you might start with just an initial look at a opposite sex, then again before long every sexual deviancy can become appropriate, because you've got to get your fix. And that's what happens to guys. And that's the cyberporn hook. It's got you. Once it's got you, again, it's always a need for more and more and more and more, which means you've got to take in different forms and different types of sexual deviancy. You've got to expand that to be able to continue to maintain the rush that you got from when you first were introduced. So guys, that's what we're looking at. That's what we're going to be talking about. So here's the question. As we take a break here for just a moment, let me just ask you this. Are you stuck on porn? Have you been stuck on porn? Have you found that you cannot get unstuck from porn? Well, that's what we're going to be looking at, is how are we going to get unstuck from porn.